And with that, it's another Wednesday night. Another Jason McLean Questions Everything. We're going to be talking Creationism with John from the Lost World Museum. Y'all are going to love it. It's going to be a great show. And yes, this is our next to last show. Next week is the last sort of official show. Don't worry, I've got some quick thoughts I'm going to be putting together next week. So there will be one last quick thought for y'all. I'm going to save that. But so next week it's just going to be me, Donnie, Randy, and Rob kind of hanging out, sort of decompressing. So I'd love to see all of y'all there. But without further ado, or gilding of any lilies, let me go ahead and bring up John. Hey, John. Oh, sorry. I got you muted there. There we go. Sorry.
That's great. Hi, Jason. How are you?
So far, so good. Why don't you tell everybody what you do, where to find you, and
Sure.
What you're about?
Absolutely. My name's John Adolphi with the Lost World Museum, and we have just a little catchphrase that says, where did we come from? Apes, aliens, or Adam? And that pretty much summarizes where we're at. We like the idea of comparing and contrasting different worldviews and utilizing some of the same evidences through those worldviews as we, examine everything. And when you do compare and contrast, has a tendency of being able to show the strengths and weaknesses of the argument when you set them side by side. It's a very telling way of doing it. So we deal with Noah's Ark, giant humans, out-of-place artifacts or ooparts, and a little bit in geology too, like how fast can fossils form and how fast can rock form. So those are kind of our main staples, so to speak, as we ask and answer that question collectively.
Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to get you on before we shut down. I was glad to be able to do that because I wanted people to know who you are, to be introduced to you and your material. Honestly, I think you have one of the best channels out here doing. It's very slick, very well done. But the thing I'm really excited about is the material that you present, right? Again, you are presenting it in a way that's very easy to understand, very easily digestible. I think one of the problems that we have, right, is that a lot of people try to over-explain the situation, right? And they want to present themselves as oh, look how smart I am here. And so they go out of their way to create this sort of overly complicated message when it's really a lot more simple. And I like what you're doing over there. I've got a link to your website below. You've got a Facebook channel and TikTok and all that, right?
Yeah. The main platforms that we focus on are YouTube and Facebook, Instagram. We are on X and Threads as well too, and Rumble. But those are the main ones and TikTok, TikTok, we have almost just on the cusp of 1 million followers. And so that's, we've hung there for about 3.5 years, the longest of any place. And, but we're just now building Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, excellent. That's where, whatever your flavor is, we're probably there.
Well, there you go. Y'all have one of the things I like that y'all have done is show how quickly rock forms and how quickly things mineralize, because I do think that's one of the big things, right? Everyone's like, oh, well, clearly this mineral formation must have taken millions and millions of years. And there you are. It's like, no, here's this artifact or this thing that was done very, very recently and mineralized very, very quickly. Do you have you wouldn't happen to have anything on hand, would you?
I certainly do.
This is going to sound like we actually set this up and we didn't. I thought about that just now. I'm like, I didn't mention we should probably bring some of that on, but yeah.
Well, those 4 things that I mentioned that we specialize in, I was looking on my rack of different things and I said, we probably should have some representations of that. So
there you go.
This right here is an iron pipe, a cross section of an iron pipe.
Yes.
And this comes from the Czech Republic and the city of Karlovy Vary. What's interesting about Karlovy Vary is that they have a very mineralized water that goes through the town, and very historical, even as far back as I believe the 1600s. And it was thought to give enhance life,
Right.
to bathe in it, to drink in it, but it collects minerals awfully quickly. And this pipe right here is no more than 80 years old. So you've got about 3/4 of an inch of aragonite, which is, and that's just, I've never heard of aragonite. Matter of fact,
Yeah.
I didn't even know how to pronounce it when I first learned about this. Now, to your point, this is what makes it so much fun for me. I'm high school educated, and I have no problem stating that because I study a lot, and then I share it in a shoulder to shoulder, whoever wants to go shoulder to shoulder, as we go together looking at these things. And I
Yep.
explain them in a way that I would hope that somebody would explain it to me, being the dumb bunny that I am. So anyway, this right here accumulated, and you can see the rings, and it's quite pretty. But
Yeah.
the point is this is rock. This is rock. This, they say, oh, well, it's blah blah this, blah blah that. The critics. It's like, okay, but it's still rock. Well, that doesn't prove how old it is, or how old a fossil is. I get it. And then what's really interesting? I'll get the comments every once in a while when it comes to this subject. Well, that's taught in Geology 101. Well, I don't know if it really is or not. And I get their point. They're trying to say that this information is not new. Well, tell me where they're actually sharing that, even though they believe in millions and millions of years. Where is that being shared on? The History Channel? No. In the high school textbooks? No. So I don't know what they're coming from. But anyways, that's one example.
And so that's a really interesting point, because this is actually something I've mentioned from time to time. And by the way, that is literally one of my favorite artifacts that you've shown on your channel, because it's like, that's not a 64 million year old, drain pipe. That's an 80-year-old drain pipe. And again, you have to realize the water is moving through it. That isn't some drain pipe where the water was standing there. And that's just a few decades of constant moving water that created that kind of mineralization. But to your point, they'll say, well, that information's out there. You're right. The information is out there. But you don't, not you, but the atheists, they don't include that information when they talk about, oh, this takes place over millions of years. Really, what's your evidence that it takes millions of years? Because it takes millions of years. Okay, well then, but if we have examples of mineralization happening very rapidly, why isn't that part of the conversation? Well, because they know rapid mineralization actually it works against their theme. Their entire construct requires, I love how Joe Rogan says it requires one miracle. They ask for one miracle. Y'all are asking for an awful lot of miracles. But one of the big ones is one of the big assumptions is millions upon millions upon millions of years of time that they can't prove actually happened. And the things they point to, it's like, well, here's evidence that this took millions and millions of years. But everything that we have that we can actually observe in a laboratory or in nature suggests, no, these things happen very rapidly under the right conditions. Like, oh, I don't know, a catastrophic event, like a flood.
I got one more for you in this category.
Excellent.
This right here, and this right here is a French Coke bottle. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to speak French, but that right there is in French. And there is a place in France to where they take items and put them under a calcite bath, meaning that the same material or the same material in water that would be in caves that would create the stalactites and stalagmites is going on in this cave. Same thing, It's just that it's pouring down pretty good too. So I had them take this exact Coke bottle and put it in their little calcite. Looks like a medium to heavy rain. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
When it's under there. And this is what happens after 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks.
That's a lot of calcite buildup.
It's about 5 millimeters in 5 weeks.
That's insane.
It's kind of pretty too.
Oh, it's
And I was going to have them put it in there for longer. They said, no, you won't even recognize it as a bottle if we put it in there longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, 5 weeks, and you get that much buildup around an artifact.
yes,
And it's just again, it's not like they're not doing any special chemical treatment. They're not spraying it on there deliberately and
no,
manipulating it. This is a natural process. Essentially, they're just like, here, let's just put stuff in there, and that's what happens.
yes, exactly. And that doesn't prove that
Mhm.
fossils are young. It just shows that under the right conditions, that rock can form quickly. Alluvial or sedimentary rock
Mhm.
has the potential of forming quickly. But they'll quickly point out, what was the flow rate? No, you're absolutely right. You should ask that. And what was the concentration of minerals? Absolutely, you should ask that. But then you can ask the question, what kind of conditions is necessary for a large cave to produce conical cones of massive amounts
Yeah.
of calcite? Is it drip, drip, drip? Does that create a long, skinny tube? Or does
Mhm.
it create this massive, huge, or do you need a lot of water slushing about where
Mhm.
nobody was there to observe in order to create these walls of, I can't remember the name of the flow stone, I think it is. Flow
Yeah.
stone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the way I've always the metaphor I've come up with the last 2 years that I really, really like is it's like going into a locked library, and there are books everywhere, right? In different states of opening, and you have someone walk in and say, well, what happened is there was an earthquake and all of these books fell off the shelf, and that's what we're seeing here. Well, okay, let's go and let's look at, and if you see things like books being stacked on top of each other from different parts of the room, that starts begging that begs a lot of credulity with me, because it's like, okay, well, particularly if we start seeing similar topics from different parts of the room stacked next to each other, or on top of one another, or if they're arranged alphabetically, we start seeing intelligence, we start seeing it, then okay, that doesn't work, right? You are working from the presumption that humans couldn't have done it, because you're like,
Right.
well, the room was locked, therefore humans couldn't have anything to do with it. Horse, we're gonna get to your question at the end because I like that question. um it's it's one of those things where if you're working from the assumption and from the presumption that humans did not go into this library, then you have to create theories that go again that to explain what is
Yeah.
much more easily explained by human intervention. Well, it's the same way with, well, actually, let's deal with Horace's question real quick. Horace, Professor Emeritus of astronomy, great guy. I've had him on the channel. By the way, I'm enjoying Willamette Skies, by the way. Looking forward to the new one. He says, a young Earth is a tough sell for me, Jason. The evidence for an old universe seems overwhelming, and a very young Earth in an old universe would seem strange. Well, there's 2 points on this, right, that are important. One, a lot of the assumptions for there to be an old Earth and an old universe are based on certain assumptions predicated on the idea that it's old. There's a lot that we don't see in the laboratory. Now you may say, well, hold on, but the galaxy, we see stars from so far distance, right? A young Earth creationist does have an explanation for that. But the things that we can observe, that we can do, like rapid mineralization, there's evidence that's left out of the conversation that is not allowed to be heard within the entirety of the conversation. Secondly, there's lots of different flavors of creationism. There really are. But the problem is none of them are allowed to be in. They're not allowed to talk. They're not allowed to be heard. Again, my favorite little Joe Rogan quote that's going around says, evolutionists, ask for only one miracle. I would point out you're actually asking for millions of miracles to get humans, right? The number one is, and forget the Big Bang, life from non-life. That's the number one. That is an even bigger miracle than the idea that the Big Bang occurs randomly without organization, without an intelligence behind it. Like I said, there's a lot of different flavors of creationism. The point is, none of them are allowed to speak. None of them are allowed to be heard, because the problem is there's facts that really go against a lot of the themes that are presented from atheists. That's really what this comes down to. Is, again, nothing John had, the two artifacts John showed wasn't. It's not like it's not well known. It is well known. However, it's also not a part of the conversation, because stalagmites and stalactites are shown as saying, here's evidence of deep time. Fossilization, mineralization are shown as evidence of deep time. And yet we have evidence that it does not take deep time to get the kind of mineralization and fossilization and calcite buildup that is being presented. So we have a discrepancy between the evidence that is actually available and observable and the presuppositions that are being presented as evidence for this, which is why I like what John does. I love the materials he brings on. Because, like I said, there's a lot of different branches of creationism, including young Earth creationism. And the problem is, we need to have a conversation and actually present and allow evidence to be presented to come to an actual scientific understanding of things. The problem is, it ain't allowed, because there's too much money in the current paradigm. There's too many degrees, too much moolah invested in this modern paradigm of we're random accidents. There's no design. And humans are just an accident of cause and effect, and there's nothing else. That's very useful for a lot of people to have that philosophy. So when John and others present material and say, well, okay, well, hold on. These things are examples that really put to question your presupposition. They're shut down. The London hammer is probably the greatest example of, here's an artifact that was found. It was tested. No one will look at it. And they'll say, well, why don't you produce it? What? It has been tested. It has been presented to the mainstream science, and they will not look at it. They pretend it won't. They'll just say it's a forgery with zero evidence. And it's just, nope, it's a forgery. It's not real. Okay, what's your evidence for it? It's a forgery. It's not real. Again, the library was locked. Therefore, people could not have come in and taken the books off the shelves and stacked them in this way. Here's our theory. It's the presupposition that prevents a real conversation from happening.
Can I take a swing at Horace's
sure
thought here? I come from, and I don't mind disagreeing with people, and I'm not talking about Horace.
Yeah.
But I try my hardest not to be disagreeable. So if anybody here disagrees with what I'm saying, that's okay. This is, like I say, this is a journey in trying to explore. I'm going to present just real briefly in a couple of paragraphs, the reconciliation of what appears to be a old universe and a young Earth. My understanding is that jealousy that took place between Christ and Satan went far, far back, and that Christ is the creator God, speaking things into existence. My personal understanding, denomination that I, plant my flag, if you want to say, has this idea that Christ was superintending the other unfallen worlds, that we were the only ones that fell. And while he was doing this, Lucifer became increasingly unnerved of seeing this unassuming looking, the Father, I believe, looked differently than the Son, because the Son always takes that role of unassuming humility. And I wouldn't be surprised pre-incarnate when he was in heaven that he also had that same thing, to where Lucifer, with all his gems and his pipes and timbrels and everything, looked on him and said, if he can create by speaking things into existence, and I'm the top dog, why can't I have that privilege of creating. So he is following him around, and Satan is percolating these ideas of independence while this is happening for no apparent reason whatsoever. So then finally a conflict takes place in heaven. There's a war in heaven, and 1/3 of the angels gets tossed out. Immediately the Father and the Son confer, and they go to planet Earth, which I believe was there for a long period of time, and then spoke things into existence. Life on Earth, spoke it to existence. Jesus did that, and created 2 people that were going to help repopulate a heaven by giving them, the only ones in the universe, the ability to procreate. And then Adam and Eve went about, and they were going to be tempted one time. And had they passed it, then Lucifer would have been wiped out, not burned forever in hell, but he would have been ceased to exist, all of them. And so then a flood happens 1,500 or 1,600 years later. So life on Earth and the fossil record and the alluvial stone we see is all, 6 to 10, let's just say 10,000 years, but everything else is very, very old as far as that's how I see it, at least.
So, okay, so this is exactly what I meant, that there are a lot of different flavors of creationism. One of them is old Earth creationism, where it says the universe and everything is old. It is billions and billions of years old. However, humanity, particularly humanity, and in one version will even say humans with souls, that's only a few thousand years old, right? That's more in the 6 to 15,000 year old spectrum. So there's a lot of different flavors of this. There's some, like I would say, well, why wasn't it just made old, or not even old? Let me let me rephrase it this way. There is no reason to think. The problem is we are assuming age versus created state. I think that is the problem, is the assumption of age. And it's like, but again, I go back to the library metaphor. You're assuming there had to be an earthquake because you're assuming humans couldn't have been in the room. There's a presupposition of what we're looking at must be old. And again, the number one reason is, well, but we have starlight that we're seeing from millions and millions of light years away. Right. But that doesn't require it to be old. It just says it's there, right? If it was created to be there, then it's there. It doesn't presuppose actual age. Again, Jesus's first miracle, water into wine. Wine requires time, and yet it's instantly created. Why? It's demonstrating. Actually, there's a lot of metaphor in that story we don't need to get into. But for our purposes, it's showing the creation of something that has apparent age. But I would argue, if you were to measure that wine by any scientific standard, it would still be old. It's not just apparent age, it is real age. So the issue here is, again, there's a lot of presuppositions. And the question is, well, what can we actually test? What can we observe in nature? And this is where a lot of things start falling apart, because we have things like that pipe, which shows mineralization can happen very, very rapidly.
Right.
And the problem is, we have an argument that is created and goes actually against what is observed, which is clearly these things must be millions and millions of years old because of the mineralization. And yet all the actual tests we can do show mineralization happening very rapidly. Again, the issue of soft dinosaur or soft tissue in dinosaur bones, where you can actually test and find hemoglobin. This is why we know Tyrannosaurus Rex is related to chickens, is because of the hemoglobin that we were able to. And the problem is, you can't have a dinosaur bone that's over 60 million years old, or really for T-Rex over 70 million years old, and still have soft tissue. They'll say, well, we've come up. Don and I were talking about this. There's this paper. They're like, well, here's an answer for it. Well, okay, but I can if I come home with lipstick all over my collar, I can create some kind of crazy scientific theory as to why. It's like, no, I wasn't making out with another chick. There was, women were they were just blowing kisses at me, and all their makeup got on my. No one's gonna buy that. It's a scientific theory in search of to solve a problem that's where the action's obvious. For me, it doesn't matter if it happens, 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago. Masoretic text is 6, Septuagint 7. or if you want to say it's metaphorical and goes back 15 to 20,000 years, fine. That's a conversation, right? The thing is, we need to be able to have the conversation and actually measure these things. The simple fact of the matter is there's no way you're going to have millions and millions and millions of years and still get soft, pliable tissue, active hemoglobin. We know it can. Even if I give you 1,000,000 years, you're still 64 million years off from that, right? Hold on. Well, and so okay, so here's the thing, right? Horse is a great point, and I want to get to Knack's thing about carbon dating. It says one of today's major astronomy creationists was a student of his. Again, love Horse. So I've heard a little of those ideas. However, universe made looking old could never be tested by scientific methods. Right. But that's the problem, right? There are a lot of things that really can't be tested scientifically. In fact, any historical event cannot be tested scientifically. That's the problem. The issue of creation is not, and origins are not really scientific. They're historical. And the problem is when you're trying to reconstruct what happened from what we can see, all we're saying is let's put everything on the table and let's actually see what the evidence is. The problem is a lot of evidence is being held back. That's the real issue here is there's good scientific evidence and observations made, and it's all being held back, and it's not allowed to be said because it goes against a predetermined orthodoxy. Hold on. I do like Donnie's comment. Sorry, baby. I got into a brawl at a lipstick factory. I should have come up with that one. That would work better. So Knack says that he believes that carbon dating is way off due to us using nuclear weapons. So interesting fact here, Knack. As this is one of the things we talked about in archaeology. You can't actually carbon date new materials after 1935. You can't do it. But there's a bigger issue here. The issue isn't necessarily nuclear weapons, things like that. There have been changes in the amount of carbon-14 that's being produced in our atmosphere. Carbon-14 dating requires a constant creation of carbon-14 from carbon-12. But the other issue here is, and it's in the literature right now, after about 50,000 years or so, carbon-14 should no longer exist. It is, again, nothing you can do. You can't lock it in a Tupperware and have it stay safe, right? It's going to degrade back into carbon-12 because it is a stable dating, or it's a stable molecule. The problem is we have evidence of carbon-14 in diamonds. And this is not super secret squirrel tech. It's all in the literature. That's the problem, is that people are finding carbon-14 in things that aren't supposed to have carbon-14. So either we have a problem, either our understanding of carbon-14 is way wrong, which leads to other further misunderstandings of basically nuclear physics, or two, maybe this stuff's a lot younger than we think it is, and that's a bigger problem, because again, it goes back to there are assumptions about the age, and all of these models that we're working up here, but all the models that everything's based on is based on this down here, and it's this assumption of deep time and deep age. Well, if you're building on top of that, then anything that says, hey, maybe this deep age isn't here, it's got to go. And they won't, and it's very hard to get people to really reconcile the fact that, hey, if we're finding, again, everyone's like, well, you can't carbon date dinosaur bone because it's fossilized. But if you carbonate the stuff that's not fossilized, the aforementioned soft tissue, and you get a date of 15 and 20,000 years, well, we got some questions, don't we? Because it shouldn't be there. There shouldn't be any carbon-14. Not after 50,000 years. Certainly not after 65 million. Diamonds are supposed to be millions and tens of millions of years old, and yet we're finding carbon-14 in them. So again, the question is the presupposition of deep age wrong? Or is our complete understanding of this, of how carbon-14 works, is that wrong? One of those has to go. One of those is an issue, because what we can actually observe in the laboratory conflicts with the assumptions and with what we are told is evidence of deep time? What is evidence of atheistic Darwinian evolution? That's my problem. And Donnie, carbon-14 should never return your call. That's all I'm saying. He tried carbon dating.
Oh my goodness.
This is why we keep him around.
Love it.
Winkemy asks, is there a better way to date things? I would say Tinder. No, honestly, this is the problem. I don't know that there is. I mean, there are, like, let me stop with, there are different kinds of dating, radiometric dating. There's a lot of different ways to date things. The problem is, like anything else, a lot of things are built on presuppositions and paradigms. I'm not, like, honestly, for carbon-14, I'm really only good on carbon-14 up for the last 1,500 years. I'll get to, I'm like, okay, 2,000, 3,000 maybe. The problem is we get bigger and bigger variables on carbon-14 results when the dates come back. And so the issue is, it also, again, we have to assume that the carbon-14 production and absorption has always been the same. If it wasn't always the same, if it was produced more in an earlier time frame, then that's going to skew any and all dating that we get. And I'll say this, I'm not a nuclear physicist. I don't work in that field. So I couldn't even dream up a better way of dating something, right? But it is where we are. The question is, this is something that's presented as prima facie evidence of deep time of these situations, and yet there are issues that need to be addressed that are never addressed. They're never brought to the table, and if you mention them, you're told to shut up. That's the issue. That's why I've got John on here. Again, next to last episode, I want y'all to be introduced to his material so you can look at what he's produced over the years. Go and look at what he has, because because the thing is, there's a bigger, broader conversation that needs to be had. Again, I would like to have a full conversation with someone about the London Hammer, but no one outside the creationist circles will have that conversation, because they know that if they deal with it, they've got a problem if it's real. That's why it has to be a hoax. They can't allow it to be real.
You know the iron cup in coal?
Yep.
Okay. Those of you out there that don't know about the story, 1912 at a municipal electric plant, a large, oversized piece of coal. Just one second.
You have yours? Yeah, I got mine. This is an actual replica. Yeah, this is one of Joe Taylor's replicas.
That's right. And they broke it open, and that's what they found, what Jason just held up. Now, I had so that iron cup right there is like, that's antediluvian. That's like right out of the Smith shop at Tubal-Cain. That's what we're talking about 5,500 years ago. So I was interviewing Carl Baugh about all three of the artifacts, the London Hammer, it was a telephone interview, and the fossil finger, just looking for a little bit more deeper insight on all three of them. I'll tell you what, I haven't published any of this yet, but I'll give you a little sneak peek, a little spoiler alert on the iron cup. He said when they analyzed inside the cup at the bottom, they found traces of coal. That's cool, because they do not have the pieces of coal, or that one would be a slam dunk.
Yeah.
But the fact that they found coal at the bottom of the cup is, I think, at least interesting.
Well, so the thing about the iron cup in coal is that it was because here's the problem. There are a lot of artifacts found within coal. This is not something that's new to literature. And the problem is that means either the coal is new, or there was someone banging around with iron tools millions upon millions of years ago for them to be in the coal.
That's right.
That's the problem. Again, the London Hammer doesn't rust because it's got a ferric oxide, at least coating, showing it was bonded with chlorine. I've talked to specialists saying, hey, how do you do this? They're like, we don't really know how you would do this, but that's why it doesn't rust. So the problem is we can't get anyone to talk about it. Real quick. So, and again, going back to the iron cup and coal, to your point, coal, again, is supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old, and yet we keep finding artifacts in them. The iron pot and coal is one of them. The only explanation that's ever been given is, hey, this was a piece of coal, or this was a modern artifact that got lodged in and then recompressed around it. Since we don't have the original coal, we can't really prove that
That's true.
that it wasn't coal that had been reformed around it.
True.
The problem is we have the person who got we have two problems with that. One, the person for whom the iron cup fell out, he was looking at the coal and he doesn't mention it looking like any of the ones that had reformed, because that does look different. It was a normal spot of coal that he was breaking up, which is why he was having to do it. Secondly, we can't find any other, if this iron cup, which looks similar, but again, how many shapes are there for cups? The problem is we can't find anything that's been mass produced from that time period that matches this cup. Similar, yeah, but again, similar is not the same thing. And if it's supposed to be some mass-produced product, there should be plenty of examples of that exact cup that we can point to and say, see, it's the exact same thing. Therefore, this was just a modern artifact that was lodged into some coal that got reformed due to, it got wet or whatever and bonded together, and that's why it was there, right? So there you go. I mean, that's the problem, right? Is we have ways around this, and it's like, well, this is the explanation that's given, but there's no evidence given for that explanation. Well, as I knock my microphone down real quick. Mm-hmm.
There is a project we're working on right now that we haven't mentioned at all. And maybe some of you are familiar with the book Secrets of the Lost Races by Rennie Nurembergen. Maybe not. That book I highly recommend. It is the basis of what our museum is about, because it deals with giants, Noah's Ark, out-of-place artifacts. Now, probably everybody's heard the term OOPArts before, out-of-place artifacts. What they might not know is that term was invented by a gentleman by the name of J.R. or Joe R. Jockmans. And I spoke to him in 2005. He's passed away now. But when I spoke to him in 2005, he sent me a manuscript that was the basis for Secrets of the Lost Races. And I went and I just tucked it away. I pulled it out about 2 months ago because we're starting to reprint old books that are like hard to find, that are like the coolest.
Yeah.
And his book, Strange Artifacts Found Deep in the Earth, I think is the name of the title of it. The whole 30-page manuscript contains approximately 60 to 90 out-of-place artifacts, and he's the one that invented that acronym. Oh,
excellent! So you're going to be reprinting these books and making them available.
I'm very selective in the sense that I want to make sure that it's not just blah blah blah, that it is like the best of the best. And yes, I was about halfway through the project, and I thought probably I should find somebody related to him to get permission to do this.
Yeah.
I called up his ex-widowed bride, and when she found out what we were doing, she was absolutely thrilled and gave me full permission to do this. So phase one is to take it from this ratty manuscript and get it into digital format. We've done that. Now I'm going through and proofreading every single word, every single letter, and I'm about halfway done. Once I do that, then the next step is to find, for the first time, because this manual doesn't have this, photographs of the and the iron pot, by the way, is in there.
Excellent.
So if you like stories like the iron pot, you're going to love this, because the whole book is filled with that type of thing. So
excellent. Wonderful. I didn't know y'all were doing that. So I'm thrilled. I'm glad you're doing that. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Not yet.
So again, this is why I wanted to bring y'all here again, next to last episode. Want y'all to be exposed with what he's got, because there's going to be more coming, right? Obviously I got stuff I'm going to be coming up, but that's going to be a little down the way. But John here and his lovely wife are producing materials. They're doing things, books. Y'all want to keep track of it to see some of the things that are again, not allowed to be spoken of, things that aren't allowed to be presented because they go against the modern paradigm,
or they've been forgotten.
or forgotten.
And that's what we're
Essentially
trying to
the
do.
same
We're
way.
trying to resurrect this to a whole new generation for them to look at it, clean it up, maybe even enhance it, so that, and then present it and let other people take a look at this for the first time in, 30, 40, 50 years, and let them determine, people say, oh, that's been debunked a long time ago. By who?
Yeah.
I've yet to have anybody, by what is his name? Cuban there, by him. He's the only one that seems to be debunking anything. And it's not to say that he has the final word on anything.
Yeah.
So.
Well, again, there were a lot of mathematicians who were debunking Einstein back in the day too. So, real quick, what was the Spiritual Odyssey was asking? What was the author's name again?
Okay, so the book that you can get on Amazon right now, which was the manuscript was utilized to produce this. Okay, but the manuscript is much more potent, is what I found out after reading it. It's called Secrets of the Lost Races by Rennie Nurembergen. And it's a guy, Rene, Nurembergen, that you can get right now. And I've read it 5 times. It's that good. But the one that we have is Strange Artifacts Found in the Earth. That's the one that we're coming out with. And yeah, so that's, we'll be letting everyone know about that.
Wonderful. So again, go follow, see
and
what
his
they've
name
got.
is Jochmans, Jochmans. Maybe there's 2 N's. Jochmans.
Excellent. And again, you'll go follow. He'll John will have all that information when it's available. Real quick, Winkamy asked, why just carbon-14? Why not some other minerals? Well, so again, carbon-14 is not a mineral. That's sort of a main thing. So carbon-12, again, carbon is the basic building block of life as a material. Carbon-12 gets into the upper atmosphere again as particles. It is each atom is exposed to cosmic rays. Is the easiest. They go and get Fantastic Four. They add 2 electrons. Now it becomes carbon-14, and then organic things breathe it in. This is why carbon dating is used. Organic things like trees, humans, dogs, cats living together, mass hysteria. We all breathe it in, and when we stop breathing, we stop bringing in carbon-14. And so now that carbon-14 begins breaking down into carbon-12, and that's how that works, right? That's why it's used. And again, it works to a point. The problem is, again, there's a lot of assumptions based on carbon-14 production, absorption, and again, as we're seeing, either our understanding of carbon-14 is wrong because we're finding it in diamonds, or that material's newer than we're being told that it is, and how it was formed was different. So again, to Horace's point, it's like it would be impossible to test if something was made to appear old. You're right, that would be impossible to test. What we can test though is, but the things that we are able to test, the things that are used as evidence of deep time, the question then becomes, well, is that actually evidence of deep time, or does it have another explanation, an explanation through catastrophic geological events like the flood described in Noah, which if taken literally and at least seriously would be an event that would be massively catastrophic, that would do the things that is described, and would also have it would leave a particular geological footprint. The question is, does what we see reflect that, or does it reflect deep time? Well, that's the conversation that needs to be had. That's the conversation we're trying to have, because again, even creationism comes in a lot of flavors. It really does. But I would suggest that a true young earth creationist who goes by the Masoretic text, or a true young earth creationist who goes by, I don't mean true as in the right ones, I mean everything's created young, or the one that uses the Septuagint, which has like a little over 7,000 years, or you think of it as more metaphorical, and everything in between. Those are all people sitting at a table eating the same hors d'oeuvres the same appetizer. But when you're saying, no, this is the Darwinian atheistic perspective, that's not even the same restaurant. So for me, I'm not really as concerned with how it shakes out at the table per se, because fundamentally they're all saying the same core thing. And that's a conversation that needs to be had to sort between them. But right now, the bigger conversation is, what is the actual evidence that we can find? What are the artifacts that are found? What are the things that are testable and observable under laboratory or in the real world? What does it indicate? Does it indicate this story over here, or does it indicate this story over here? What the evidence John and other people like the Creation Evidence Museum, the ICR, are presenting is saying, no, there is evidence that this over here, that the universe is not an accident, and that there is reason to think that there was a catastrophic event that happened within just a few thousand years, within the last 10 to 15,000 years, that caused these events. That conversation needs to be had, and it's being suppressed because it does have ramifications for everyone else and for the modern paradigm. Horace, at no point did I think you were being disagreeable. Please understand. I don't think Horace could be disagreeable if he tried. Honestly, I just don't think he can. And trust me, Horace, at no point and please don't take me as trying. I'm just passionate. Trust me, if I'm going to be disagreeable, you'll know. Titan says, Jason, it's like you've always argued. The science and evidence is there. Christians have to get better at presenting it. And that's exactly where people like John come in. And again, why I'm working it, again, I'm getting out of the podcasting lane to go back to books, because the thing about a book is you can sit down and you can read it. And you can see everything. You can see the footnotes. You can actually see the argument in one place. And again, y'all know I like to draw things, so it's going to be a lot of artwork. I'm a very visual person. A lot of people are visual. We have to be able to present the evidence, not just in a, we tend to forget the 95 Theses were written in Latin and nailed to a church door, because that's where the intellectuals, that's how you conversed amongst intellectuals, right? Amongst the educated. Martin Luther wasn't trying to cause an uproar, but what happened was students got a hold of it. And because of the printing press, that argument, his thesis was able to be mass produced to everyone, and they saw the argument. What's happening here now is that people are finally being able to get the information out to the masses to understand, oh, hold on, there's another conversation happening here. The things that we've been told are hard and fast evidence of this worldview really aren't as hard and fast as they've claimed. And in fact, there's material to suggest that it's actually the exact opposite, that there is another alternative here. And that's all this is about. It's having that conversation, because now is the time to get people to speak. How can we come to the truth if all the data isn't on the table? And more importantly, how can we come to an answer if data is being held from the table and being skewed in such a way to create an alternative viewpoint?
Jason, I'd like to interject something. The Radio Vault said something very profound, and I have a quick story that might be of value to him or some of your listeners or viewers. Prophecy is the key to evidence, and I understand what you mean by that. There is a gentleman by the name of Walter Veith. He was in South Africa, and he was a professor of science of evolution. And the creationists used to come with him, and he's now a Christian, okay? But he said, they came to me with their silly books. That's how he referred to it. But when they came to him with prophecy, completely shook his world. And that was the opening wedge for him, was prophecy. Daniel chapter 2, Revelation, and the rightly understanding that, it converted him.
Yeah.
So there is something to be said about the creation information. Absolutely. And for some, it may not be that. It may be prophecy that brings them from atheism, like he was, to a full-flown now pastor and evangelist, So
yeah. Well, and ironically, my specialties are all the stuff to tie into the beginning of the book and the end of the book, because for me, it's the middle of the book that matters. Well, if the story of how we got here is correct, and if we're seeing what happens at the end of the book play out, and we are, again, My audience does not know the full level of the crap I took for that last video I posted. Donnie knows about prophecy. Is that, again, if the beginning is true and the end is true, then that means the middle is true, and the middle is what's really important.
Sure it is.
And again, I go back, as I mentioned before, a lot of this is presupposition, right? It's if you interpret, or if you presuppose that no one went into the library, then any theory you come up with has to omit human intervention.
That's right.
So no matter how convincing your math is on how the books could be shaken out a particular way, you can create all kind, but it's all predicated on a presupposition. That's the issue. And again, people say, well, hold on, but you're a creationist. Isn't that a presupposition? It is.
Yeah.
But I wear that on my sleeve. I'm telling you that at the beginning. The problem is we have another group that is claiming that they don't have a presupposition when it is a presupposition.
So true.
It's not about science versus religion. It's about religion versus religion. I've said that for years on the show. So everyone who's watching, who's been with me anytime, knows that saying. It's not science versus religion, because science is just a tool used by people. It's two different religious views that are at odds. And the problem is one side is admitting to their presuppositions. The other side is claiming that they don't have a presupposition that they're basing it on when they do. All I'm saying is let's just get I believe that if we get all the evidence on the table, we'll come to a clearer answer. Problem is the other side doesn't want all the evidence on the table. And that does include things like prophecy. That does include things like the supernatural. And that's an issue. Right? When it comes to things like the supernatural, again, lots of y'all have been with me on talking about UFOs and aliens. It's like, great. Why do we have cases where exorcisms into them? Why is there such a large parallel between UFOs and abductees and poltergeist activity? Things that shouldn't really match unless what you're seeing, the little gray men, and that's more recent. Maybe they're not little gray men at all. And that's the issue, right? It's having the conversation. But a lot of people, they'll take all that off the table because they want their little gray men to be from another planet. They don't want it to be something else. All we're asking is for everything to be put on the table. And John, I'm glad you came here. Again, the link to your website is in the doobly-doo below, technical term. And again, you've got a lot of, guys, follow him on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. What are the other places that they can find you?
Instagram, TikTok. If you like X, go there. If you like Threads, go there. I don't know why, but anybody want to go to Threads? It's not very interactive. I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound such like
I didn't even know Threads was a thing. I'm going to be honest. You said Thread. I'm like, oh, it's probably one of those.
I don't get it.
I didn't even know it was a thing. Well,
I keep growing, but it's like, what am I even doing here? I just don't get it. Nobody seems to interact is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
The thing grows. I put things up there, the same place I put it, and it just, anyway. Hey,
yeah.
Can I just plug one thing before
please? Please plug away.
Remember, I was saying that we're taking older books and then reimagining them, and one of them is this one right here, and Valley of the Giants. This is the story of the Paluxy River in Glen Rose, Texas. This is the giant human man tracks. And let me just see if I can show you. Giant human man tracks. Look at the size of that man track. They are 18 to 22 inches with 5.5 foot gates, steps. And we reprinted this whole thing. And in AI, we created color from black and white, or at least as far as we could. And in this has got all the information about giant human man tracks and dinosaur tracks in the same strata. Go to gianthumans.com. Gianthumans.com is a library of giant human resources that we're starting to create.
Excellent. Guys, another great episode. John, thank you again. Guys, follow him on all the things. Follow him. Don't go anywhere. But guys, we'll see y'all next week. And of course, that's the last episode. We're going to do one last little roundup, but it's all going to be good. Love every single one of y'all, and we'll catch y'all later. As soon as I find the actual outro video, there we are. I saw text, and it's like the spirit of text has come upon me. Find the button, text. See y'all next week. Thanks for watching Jason McLean Questions Everything. We're live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central. Please share this video with your friends, then like, follow, and subscribe for more.